Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Courtney Gardner, a Partner Marketing Coordinator here at Perficient, and I'm excited to be moderating today's webinar, Maximize Asset Lifecycles with Oracle Project-Driven Supply Chain. Time permitting, we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the event, so please type your questions into the Q&A tab located to the right of your screen, and feel free to do that at any time. Two questions often come up with our online events. Can I get a copy of the slides and a link to the recording? The answer to both of these questions is yes. We will email you with information on how to access both the slides and the recording following today's event. So without further delay, I'd like to kick it over to Luis Sanchez to talk more about Perficient.
Thank you, Courtney. Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to go quickly through our agenda topics. We are going to basically cover a little bit about Perficient and what we do in our practice within supply chain. We're going to introduce our team that's going to be executing the webinar with us today. We're going to do a brief explanation of what is project-driven supply chain, look at some KPIs that are typically relevant for the use cases for project-driven supply chain, and then we're actually going to go into the scenarios for project-driven supply chain in a couple of different flavors, if you will. We'll do a brief summary conclusion, and we will go to some Q&A as well. So first, a little bit about Perficient. We are a global organization, global brand. They did 612 million in revenue last year, founded in 1997. 4,500 colleagues and growing significantly every year. So we're definitely a player, not just in the Oracle space, but other both technology and process spaces as well. We have offices all over North America, Latin America as well. Nearshore with those folks, as well as a global delivery center in Louisiana here in the United States, as well as in India and in China, and some offices in Europe. From a Oracle Cloud practice perspective, we cover the different pillars that Oracle typically goes to market with: ERP, SCM, and SCM really is kind of the focus of what we're going to talk about today, HCM, EPM, and analytics as well. Some of the industries that we serve include healthcare, manufacturing, energy, oil and gas, financial services, consumer markets, automotive, and transportation. The webinar that we're going through today is especially relevant for companies that are asset intensive, that have significant maintenance costs or project costs in terms of deployment, execution, as well as aftermarket type activities. Just to briefly introduce our team, so Mehmet Arison, who is a senior solution architect in our Oracle SCM practice. You're going to be listening to his voice a little bit later today. He leads the SCM piece of project-driven supply chain within the Oracle practice here at Perficient. Wallace Bartlett, who is a senior solution architect in our Oracle ERP practice, right? Wallace specializes on the projects and financial side of project-driven supply chain. So those two folks will kind of walk you through the soup to nuts project all the way through execution pieces within the Oracle SCM Cloud part of the application. My name is Luis Sanchez. I am the National Practice Director for the Oracle SCM practice here at Perficient. So I'm glad that we were able to get you all into this call. I'm excited to show you what we've done with this solution, and hopefully we can get some good follow-up conversations, and hopefully you can see some use cases relevant to your industry and your customers as well. So what is project-driven supply chain, right? I mean, it seems like a very broad term, so I'm just going to briefly going to cover what it implies. Essentially, for companies that have these big OpEx and CapEx type projects, right? Typically being able to track them from inception and that kind of budgeting phase to configuring those tasks and all of the expenditures associated with the project, and then the transition into the execution of the project from a supply chain perspective is typically a very clunky process. There's multiple systems, multiple even offline type processes that are involved in not just setting up these projects, but also keeping track of them, getting real-time updates on them, and also specifically seeing whether or not the project is maybe changing in scope, if there are changes that need to be made to said project, and the execution of those transactions, making sure that they're aligned to the broader operational objectives of the organization, right? In addition to that, there are use cases around not just once a project has been completed and created, but also even the follow-up activities to that project. Typically, those projects can sometimes be converted into assets. They can be, OPEX or CAPEX type expenses, and the way that those are either capitalized or expensed out, and then maintained after the fact, either deployed to maybe a customer organization or internally within the organization's internal assets, all are relevant for this specific use case. So project-driven supply chain from an Oracle perspective marries up all of those different things in a single flow. Everything that you're gonna see in the demos today is out of the box. We have not customized anything. So it's great that Oracle has listened to these kinds of customers, these kinds of use cases, because they are very relevant for most companies that have these kinds of assets and have these kinds of projects. So in terms of metrics, right? And people talk about how we measure success when a project gets created, right? You see companies that you create a project. Is the project completed on time, for example, right? Did the project meet the original goal, right? It goes without saying that sometimes a project changes over time, and that project, can either sometimes benefit the organization more so than the original intent, or less so, again, depending on where the project goes and how it's managed as well. So a couple other metrics to discuss would be the projects that experience scope creep. And for some of you that have done maybe technology implementation, scope creep might be a very relevant term, an important term from the perspective that we sometimes think that we're on the right track, and all of a sudden additional objectives get added to the project, and making sure that we keep track of those and also reflect them from a budgetary perspective is very, very important. And obviously the budget, right, is we started with a timeline and a budget for these projects. Did we meet that, or did we not, right? In the graphs that you're seeing here, you have some of the maturity levels that come into play. These are statistics that Oracle essentially polled with some of their customers in terms of companies that have maybe a more integrated type of setup from a let's call it supply chain projects perspective, versus companies that do some of these things either offline or with disparate systems. So getting more bang out of your buck from a project, if you will, and the execution of it is really the main use case for the project-driven supply chain capability in Oracle Cloud. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Mehmet Ersin and to Wallace Bartlett, who are going to walk us through the capability within Oracle Cloud, and also explain some concepts that we will be hearing as a part of this webinar. So take it away.
Great, thank you, Luis. This is Wallace Bartlett, and I'll be covering projects for you today. And I wanted to just address a few common project terms in case there's someone on the phone who's maybe new to Oracle projects, or maybe is an old former projects person and isn't aware of what's changed, what hasn't changed in cloud. And essentially, with regards to these terms, everything's the same. But a project is a primary unit of work that decomposes down into child tasks. And what is a task? A task is where that transactional layer or level starts to occur, where you start budgeting and incurring your labor and your material at. Your expenditure items are really your lowest level of cost, and that's the actual transaction that's going to really start generating, things like your natural account, for your debits and credits, and that goes down to a lowest task level. And an organization nowadays is also referred to as a department, and that's that organization within the system that's going to be receiving the cost and or the project revenue and invoicing. And our sample use cases today, we have 2 projects that we've configured. The first one you'll see here labeled PDSC, cost to PM to PPM. That's going to be our detailed where costs are going to actually be collected onto the project from supply chain, the true PDSC. And we've got some budgeted costs in there for 15K, invoicing and revenue or 25. We got a couple billable items, which we're going to be highlighted. Again, we're keeping it very straightforward. Towers and antennas, and we're not going to have any kind of indirect expense. And one of the reasons we went with a cell tower is we want something that kind of goes across everyone's perception. We've all at least seen one from a highway. So we've seen the antennas, we've seen the towers as well. Secondly, we're going to have another project that we're calling no cost to PPM. There's no cost on the project. There's no invoices on the project. There will be no billable items, no indirect expense, because the cost will not flow into projects. Mehmet's going to go a little bit more detail of that a little bit later, but in essence, what it allows for the supply chain folks to actually stripe and peg all those different transactions and really get the benefit of isolating things using project and task without actually pushing any kind of cost into a project. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Mehmet, and so he can go ahead and start covering off on some of the configuration that's done to get PDSC up and running. Mehmet?
Hi, hello, good morning everybody, or good afternoon. My name is Mehmet Erison, and I'll be trying to cover the supply chain area of this today's presentation. So we'll just call it out demonstration right now, but we've taken some screenshots for the sake of time to show you some of the key setups, and then we're going to jump into the screen. And now, Wallace, if you don't mind us explaining what project you've created for the Tower 10, then we can go ahead and continue our presentation.
Absolutely, thanks. So building on the terms I spoke to you a little bit earlier, again, this is really pointed at people who are either not familiar with cloud look and feel or new to Oracle projects. When I gave the project and task definitions, it'll be laid out like this in the project, and I wanted you guys to be able to have a visual representation or an idea in your head as Mehmet will carry on going forward. But our project here, you'll see our project is a little bit parent, and you see the 2 tasks, which are clearly children. And you'll notice for this first project that it's going to be both billable and chargeable. And then our second task is not chargeable. Rather, it is chargeable but not billable. So that way, if we did want to incur any indirect expenses and not actually bill a customer, we could and would. And then along with the project, we always have a project budget. Luis kind of called out in one of the earlier slides about KPIs for projects. Projects allows for pretty robust budgeting and forecasting. And for this project, we created a very simple, straightforward budget in our scenario. And the scenario is that we're going to go ahead and generate 25,000 worth of revenue, and our costs are estimated at 1,500, and that's just per plan. And there is no budget there for any kind of indirect costs as well. And now within cloud, you also have the advent of project contracts. That's a move away from the former agreements and funding and EBS. And what the contract is a nexus between project and AR, if you want to consider it that way. And it's what is going to control the rules for invoicing and also revenue recognition based on the different methods that are allowed, like percent spent, fixed fee, etc. And so what we have our contract, and we do have an invoice that we can show time permitting.
All right, thank you, Wallace. Right now, before we get into the demand and supply management and how we can take a project-driven demand and use pretty much every piece of the supply chain management application standard, just like Luis mentioned, out of the box, and fulfill that demand. We're going to be showing that. But before that, I wanted to call out several key setup steps that you have to perform in the application, because typically the project-driven supply chain management has been introduced in Cloud Release 20A, and then they have been improving, Oracle has been improving the functionality all the way to 21B, and then I believe that there are more to come in further future releases. So the first thing you do after you do your opt-ins, one of the things that you want to do is whichever inventory organizations that you would like to use the project-driven supply chain management, in other words, stripe your inventory by project and task, you go ahead and enable the inventory tracking by project. By the virtue of clicking that checkbox, you're going to be now making that inventory project and inventory task available in your supply chain management screens so you can see the values. The other important stuff is to set up default expenditure types. For you all who are working with the projects, even in Oracle EBS solution, the expenditure type is something that the project's interface expects from supply chain when the costs are transferred. Here this is the high level setup at the transaction level, if you would, that the material will go as material inventory. So this is one other piece of setup that needs to be done so that you don't learn it the hard way when transactions fail because there's no expenditure type. Now, one last perhaps setup that I wanted to call out would be the item attribution to consider. And Oracle put 3 attributes under the inventory attribute group in the PIM, product information management screens. And this project-driven supply chain attributes, one of them is pretty obvious. So if you want to go to item organization level to set up a default expenditure type, you can do that. Or you don't have to do it. You already set up your default in the previous screen. What is important is Oracle introduced the hard pegging level when it comes to plan the supply orders. You can either do it at the project and task level, project group level that I'm going to be talking about when I touch on the supply planning side, or none. When you say none, it means that, yeah, you know what, when I go ahead and plan the supplies, it doesn't matter if the demand is coming from a project or from a non-project demand source. I'm going to calculate the supply and I'm not going to stripe anything by projects. However, when you have this hard pegging level, anything other than none, in other words, if you choose one of the 3 options that you have under the projects, then this allow use of common supply flag becomes activated. It's no longer grayed out. And the meaning of that flag is simply this. Common supply, the meaning of the common supply is your in-stock inventory that is not striped by project and task. So allowing the use of common supplies, if there's a demand for a project and task, I can grab common stock. If you don't allow it, if the flag is set to no, like in this case, it means that I have on-hand quantity, I have a demand for a project and task, but I cannot transact that material to that project and task. It needs to be either transferred to the project and task, or my project should go ahead and procure or obtain the supply otherwise. So why Oracle is giving you this option? So based on your business case, you have the flexibility. We're going to be mentioning about some costing elements, some other elements, but you could be, your business requirements may say that even though I have inventory in stock, a common stock, I don't want to use that common stock before I transfer to a project for some cost reasons, for some legal reasons, or for whatever reasons. So those are the attribution that you want to consider before you start using the supply chain management, project-driven supply chain management. Now, we're now switching a little bit from, we looked at the common SCM setups, inventory item setup, and now we're looking at the supply chain planning side of the application, that concept of project groups that Oracle came out with. And I believe that that was 20C or 20D that Oracle introduced those concepts and started to use it. So it's been a while, but they are still very new. So say that you're doing business, and I'm just giving a use case that the city of Irvine is my customer, and then typically when I build cell towers for them and I get orders in terms of projects, and just like Wallace showed a second ago, we have contracts and all that. But since I'm buying the material for the city of Irvine, the way that I want to manage my supplies, if I have inventory, laying around for one project, I can go ahead and maybe supply plan it for the other projects. So Oracle gives me the opportunity to just create a project group and then list a couple of the projects underneath. You can just do more than 2, but I just kind of, for the sake of example here, I just did 2. And if you want, you can go ahead and get a task designator 1 and 2. So the meaning of the task designator is, in the next slide, we're going to be looking at the netting rules. So if you're going to give a priority in one of the tasks over other, when Oracle looks at the supply netting, saying that, well, I'm going to be jumping between multiple projects, but my O2 task is really where I want you to look at first before using other supplies in my project group. Now, think of this as in the terms of Wallace's slide where he showed that you can have a billable and non-billable. Perhaps in your project, you're procuring supplies for various business reasons into certain tasks, and then you can only start billing your customer when you move that material out of that task into a billable task. So that could be a use case where you want to use a task designator. So next slide would be where I'm showing you the netting rules. So we've created the project groups. We did our item attribution. Everything is supply chain activated. And now for my supply plan to work, I need to go ahead and tell Oracle in which order it needs to look at my supplies if it doesn't find a supplier to create a supply order, right? So I just created a BD project netting to be used in my project supply plan today. And then the order that I want Oracle to use is look at the project and task supply first, and then go ahead and do a task designator 1. And if you remember, I just said that this is going to be project 3702. And then let's go ahead and net excess project supply. And in this case, since I'm using the project group, in a project, the project supply will be looking first its own project, and then the other areas of the other projects in the project group. And if I don't find anything in my projects, then look at the common supply. And if the item attribution, remember that item attribution yes or no flag, if that is yes, then use common supply. So that's the rules. And this is a simple example just to illustrate how supply chain planning and works along with other supply chain modules when it comes to project-driven supply chain management. All right, now we're looking at the significant portions of the supply plan. My intent is not to go and explain how supply chain planning works really, but I wanted to call out 2 things in the supply plan. One is in this current release, Oracle is supporting the unconstrained planning mode. So if you want to take advantage of the product-driven supply chain management, our planning mode will be unconstrained. And I am using the netting rule here, that BD project netting that I showed you in the screen before, so that the supply plan will go ahead and consider the project and task. So it's really all, just like Louis said, all out of the box. We didn't customize or modify anything. We just did some setups, but that's all. Now that I'm ready to go, I open the doors for business, and my sales order comes in for the project 2036 Tower 10. Couple things to call out here. The project and task information is at the sales order line level. You can see that I have 4 sales order lines. And don't, you have like some excess, there are not error messages there. Typically, we're using the standard Oracle shipped orchestration, so there was nothing on hand when I created sales order, so just saying that I don't have it stock. So we are seeing the project, and if you click on the details here, you're going to have a pop-up saying that I am having the project, task, expenditure type, and expenditure organization, and based on when I enter the sales order, we're going to have this expenditure item date. So this is the information the projects expect, and then I can support it. What I like about this, you're not bound by that project and task at the order header level. So if you want to go ahead, if you have a sales order that you're creating for perhaps for the same customer using several different projects and tasks, you can just go ahead and commingle in one sales order, and the sales order lines will be driving that. The important thing to consider, since we're using the projects now to send over the fence all the cost, we expect that now the projects will be generating the revenue, and just like Wallace mentioned, just to generate your invoices. Now, I don't want to double dip the same sales order, so I don't want to generate the revenue from projects, and also I don't want to create an invoice out of the sales order. If I leave the Oracle shipped standard orchestration, after I ship my order, Oracle will want to create an invoice and will create an invoice if the processes are run. So in order to prevent that from happening, Oracle proposed a small modification in the standard orchestration and go ahead and either delete or inactivate the last invoice creation event so that the sales order line will close after the shipment events. Let's go on next. And this is just a slide to show you that when I show you the plan in the next slide, you're going to see that some of the items are going to be coming out of my manufacturing facility, and some of the items will be coming out of my distribution center. I overrode the lines and I just kind of forced Oracle to do it that way, so I can illustrate to you that the same plan will just do different things. So that's that. That's the only reason I'm showing you that, so that if you have any questions why it happened that way, that's why. All right, so just a couple things to cover. This is what I have in stock right now. Please note that I do have 2037-02 this item in this particular project and task. We're going to see how it plays out, and we're not using the common stock. And then we're going to see that how an item in my manufacturing facility now has allowing common supplies, and then I don't have a project and task in the stock quantity of hand. So we're going to see how this plays out as well. And attribution is different for this item in my distribution center. I'll also show in the plan that the same item could be set up with different tunes, different item attribution in different facilities. So in one organization, it could just be allowing the common stock, and in the other one, you cannot, maybe you're not going to allow the common stock to be used. Totally flexible, totally can be tailored based on your business practices. Okay. This is a little bit of a crowded screen, but hopefully when we go through it, everything will make perfect sense. Now, we have two sales orders that we're working with. One of them is 1697 that we just covered, and the other one is the 1696 sales order that we've created for the project that's not collecting the cost. So in this case, I like to concentrate in our first use case, which is sales order 1697. Please note that in my red box, under the project group, I do have Irvine projects. So this goes in line with my setups that I showed you. Since I told Oracle that I am using a project group, Oracle looked at my demand at the sales order level and then said that, okay, in my distribution center, I don't have the material, and look how it's pegging the project and task. Because remember, I told you that the attribution will be different between the manufacturing facility and the distribution center. Now, real nice example is I have the same item required in my manufacturing facility, but now Oracle will be using the on-hand quantity without the project and task. Now, for the work order here, drilling down to demand for one of the antennas, you see that the demand is for my project 2036, and then Oracle is proposing the on-hand quantity for 2037 and 02 supply on hand. And the reason for that is due to the setups that I've shown you before, due to the setups that we had about using the project group and using the task designator. So this is a real, maybe a crowded picture when you first look at it, but if you drill down into plan, it is pretty straightforward to understand if you start with the sales order and keep expanding it. Now, this is enough for the static data. What we like to do is we like to go onto live system now, and I am going to switch over to one of our test pods. And what we did is every time that you want to release orders and every time that you do collections, if you're familiar with the process, it takes about 5-10 minutes at least, and we don't have, unfortunately, that much time. So we went ahead and released some orders. And then I want to concentrate and I want to transact this particular demand, because this is going to be pretty much showing all the little details of the supply chain, project-driven supply chain. Just as a narrative, in this order 1697, for this project and task, in the sales order number 4, I am ordering a cell tower. And according to my sourcing rules, and I didn't want to go that much in detail in planning setups, that cell tower is manufactured in my manufacturing facility. So in order for me to ship it out of distribution center, I need to transfer it from my manufacturing facility. But in order for me to transfer it, I need to make it. I need to build it. So it's going to be creating a manufacturing work order, right? And my work order needs this material. And one of this material, one of the items that I need, and that's my pole, I don't have it in stock, so I have a purchase order. So what we like to do is I like to hand over to my colleague Wallace, so that he can perhaps show you in the projects what commitments he has. And then we're going to come back to supply chain management screens and start transacting that purchase order, review the work order demand, and then hopefully perform all the transactions and ship away the sales order out of the distribution center, looking at pretty much almost all the SCM screens, how it's the project and task is supported. So Wallace.
So as Mehmet was explaining, we've created the supply plan is ran and has kicked off a number of things and generated a number of things, and like purchase orders and other orders. And so the concept of commitments, we still have committed costs within projects. So we're going to have our purchase orders that have been generated, and also even transfer orders. So I want to go ahead and look at our committed costs for our project now. You'll see our project number, our different expenditure types, going back to that slide when we talked about the default expenditure types, and those are the ones we were using here. And I want to call out to a couple columns as well that they're important now with regards to kind of proving out the integration with the supply chain. Is we're getting different commitment types now of our transfer orders, and we're seeing our inventory items that are associated with those. And we'll see our purchase order number here, our transfer order number, and then we see the different organizations. So I'm seeing that these commitments are coming out of our manufacturing facility, and also something coming out of our distribution facility as well. And then we see the dates that they're occurring, and some of them are planned out into the future. And again, I can see all the other row so who's doing what and when. And then I see all the other information with regards to that order. For example, this purchase order, we still have visibility into the need by date and the different commitment source types. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Mehmet to carry on.
So thank you so much, Wallace. So let's go ahead, and now we're looking at the Oracle manufacturing application. And I conveniently only have one work order. Typically, you will have probably more work orders in your real life, but for the purpose of this demo, I just kind of wanted to make it nice and simple. So I will go ahead and cover this to see that how you can come to your work orders if you have many work orders, and then you want to go ahead and use the ProjectDriven supply chain management. So from my supply plan, I know that I do have a work order to complete, but as far as the manufacturing application goes, if I look at this, I can go ahead and use the project number in one of my search criterias. So, and even Oracle lets you save it, personalize this search for a project 2036. So think about it that way, that you have a couple of production supervisors that are assigned to certain projects. So they can go ahead and make searches and save them, so they kind of deal with that project itself instead of seeing everything in the application. That's a good one. So you can see that the project and task is quite visible in the search results. So you can manage it by adding the columns. This is pretty standard feature of Oracle Fusion Cloud. And if you go deep down into your project details, since I enabled the project-driven supply chain management in this particular organization, I do have the project details. You can see that there's the expenditure type, org, which is my manufacturing facility, and the project number and the task information that you want. So you can capture that, and then every time you transact, Oracle will respect that project and task. Now, the other place that you might want to look at your project and task information is perhaps in the material assignment. So there's a screen on Oracle Manufacturing Cloud that you can see. You can take a look at what work orders need material, and for what work orders all the material is available. So right now, as I said, I have only one work order, so it just pops up. But if you want, for this particular screen as well, you can go ahead and add your project number by adding from multiple, and then you can go ahead and look at the demand and supply for work orders for a given project. It's also available, and you can see that this project and task number is always, like, if you want, not always, but if you want, is displayed in the results screens. So this triangle gives you a detail of the items that your work order needs. So what I like to show you, which is in my opinion real cool. So this item, I know that I have more than 3 in stock, and it only shows you the stock that you can issue to the sales order, which is project task stripe stock. Whereas this 124, I know that in the prior sales screenshots we just showed 20, but mea culpa, I transacted 3 earlier today, so we have 17 in stock. It's showing that it's 17. So this is real nice. And then I know that one is coming. There might be more purchase orders coming, but for this project and task, I do have 1 purchase order, and I can see that purchase order from manufacturing side. Well, now that I do not have all the materials, let me go to inventory application. And now I'm wearing the warehouse operator, warehouse manager hats. And we can go ahead, and I just did query this, but I can see that I have a receipt, and then I click on that. This is my purchase order number that I show in my plan that the PO is coming for that project and task. So I will be going here, and I'll just click on receive to receive that purchase order. And you can see that the purchase or project and task is coming and make part of my receipt transaction. Now, one thing to just kind of little advice here, or little something to remember in all these supply chain management screens, Oracle introduced the project task and this country of origin as inventory attributes, I believe it was 20A, and typically they go hand to hand. And if you're an EBS customer, and if you're leveraging the Oracle e-business suite today for your business enterprise software solution, and if you're using project and task, you probably are used to having the locators reserved for project and task. So this drastically changed in the cloud. It doesn't matter which inventory you put your items to, you can go ahead and give a different project and task even you commingle in the same locator or in the same sub-inventory. So that restriction is no longer valid. So I'll just cheat here. I'll just do the show quantity. I have quantity of 1, and let me just go ahead and pick a sub-inventory to receive. I mean, as you can see now, this is not a locator control sub-inventory. So now we have received this item into stock. So let's go and look at the review completed transactions. And this is my purchase order that I received. And I keep showing this over and over. I know it's kind of getting old, but I want to stress out that the project and task is supported across almost all the screens of your project-driven supply chain module. Now, having said that, if you're wondering what stock you have, let's say that you're on the screen and you're like, well, okay, great, but can you tell me my inventory for a project and task? Yes, you can do it. You can add a field, inventory project. If you want, you can do the task. So this is saying that in my search screen, I'm saying that in my manufacturing facility, I want to see all the stock that I have for this project. So this is something that you might be interested in. So there you go. It is telling you the items that you have. I have one pole and all these items available in this project. So, and inventory attribute details, it's going to show you, again, item attributes. Remember that, project, task, and country of origin. So in a nutshell, this is what I wanted to show you in the inventory side. And let's now go back to manufacturing side and look at my item availability assignments to see what Oracle will show you. Now that I received that PO, Oracle says that all the materials are available. I think I'm going to go with that. I'm going to trust Oracle, and I'm going to say, go ahead and create the pick slip so I can go ahead and pick. And we are going to, the page is not refreshed. Go ahead and refresh the page. So the reason that we had that is because I am running the material very frequently, and sometimes Oracle wants to use the latest and greatest data. So the pick slip has been released. So let's go to inventory to see if there's anything that I can pick. So I'll just give it a couple seconds here. All right, so in the shop floor now, I have 3 picks. And then we will be going, and I'm gonna go ahead and speed up a little bit, confirm everything, and then please note, this is important. Again, in the pick slip, Oracle says that I'm issuing the items from this project and this task out of my warehouse for country of origin USA. And this is the common stock. So now you can see how the project from common stock and inventory can go ahead and all be issued to the work order in the same pick slip. I'll confirm and close that. All right, so this is done. Let's go back to manufacturing application. And if I refresh this, this is going to be gone. Very good. No more material required. And in my operations, I can see that everything has been issued. So all I have to do now is to go and execute my operations. We'll go to dispatch list. And again, in this dispatch list, you always have the option of adding task number and the project number if you want to segregate, and you can see your project and task number. So all the information is there. So I'm just going to go ahead and quickly complete the operations so that we can kind of get some labor charges, and I set up so that my labor is automatically charged. Let's go ahead and finish that off. Perfect. Now, if I go back to inventory and look, I'm going to have my cell tower, and all the other inventory has been issued to my cell tower. It's beautiful. All right, going back to our plan. So we've received our project-driven purchase order into the project's inventory. We have issued the common stock and project stock into the work order and completed the work order. And now let's look at the transfer order. So this is the transfer order that Oracle claims that that's out there. Let's see if this transfer order looks like anything that we will like. Transfer order. So what I expect this transfer order is going to be sourced from manufacturing facility. It is going to be going to my distribution center, and it needs to have the project and task all over it, and it's going to be for my cell tower. Item is correct. Source organization is correct. Destination is correct. Requested delivery date, it says like July, but I'm going to be doing it today. So we're kind of doing great. And then in the billing details, please note that the project and task is right here in this transfer order. So everything is looking great. So let me just kind of do a real quick pick release here. In the cloud, we're calling this a pick wave. So we are going to be using the release rule that I created wide open for all right, so let's see if perfect. So we're just going to release that one transfer order, and it says that the shipment lines released to warehouse is number 1, so which is what we like to see. And here I can see that I have an outbound pick. Again, what we're expecting is now the pick slip will just show that this is a transfer order. That's my order number, and I go to my pick slip. It is picking up the inventory with the project and task. No country of origin here because I didn't put a country of origin when the stock doesn't have country of origin. So regardless of project-driven supply chain or any supply chain, if the inventory doesn't have the country of origin, you cannot update it here. It's gonna drop your inventory to negative. So be careful, it's not something to update as you wish. If you don't have stock, you cannot update it, or Oracle won't let you update. So we're gonna pick confirm, and I'm gonna directly go to ship confirm for the sake of time. And then here in the ship confirm screen, you're gonna be seeing the shipment line. So this is your shipment line. And let me just slide to the right a little bit to show you that project and task information, just in case you don't do it in one shot and you come back later for the shipment lines. I want to stress again, project task information. You can find your lines, you can find your transactions. All right, so let me just go ahead and ship confirm that. Now, that's just some warnings that I have some information that's not mandatory. So it's been shipped. It is being ready. It's ready to be received in the distribution center. I'd like to pause a second right now because we've shown you pretty much all the steps that can happen for the supply chain. Let's go ahead and remember we had a PO. We received the PO. We have completely issued material to a work order. We've completed the work order and we shipped away a work order. It's a transfer order, but if it was a sales order, that would have been the same thing. So the one thing that we did not see is, remember here, I had this thing that plan, that on hand that I wanted to perform if for another supply for this item 123, I will be using the project group inventory. So there is a specific transaction in Oracle Cloud Inventory called project transfer. So if you're in a situation that your supply plan suggested to use inventory from the same project group or from a different task in the same project, what you want to do is you want to come here in the or create project transfer. Right now, I don't need to do this, but I just wanted to show that this is how it's done so that if you want to try on your own later, you don't miss that step. We're just going to say that, well, for the project, I believe 1 minute, 20, 37, and so on and so forth. We're going to just say that which task you want to transfer it from. And if you don't have inventory, Oracle will drop to 0. And then which sub-inventory it is. And then you can go ahead and say that obviously now just drop to 0 because it's probably in the wrong. But the idea is wherever your stock is, you're just going to transfer it over because I'm using the wrong item. Okay. I think I exceeded my limit for talking, so I started. All right, there we go. So this is the sub-inventory, and then the country of origin, probably United States. I didn't put, so all right. Say, and then we're just gonna transfer 3 over to 36 projects and task 01. So now Oracle can reserve and transact against that stock. So that's one inventory transaction. Just like you would do a transfer order, sub-inventory transfer, that's another transfer that you perform. So at this time, I believe I'm gonna turn it over to Wallace to see some of the costs that incurred in this side of the house. So Wallace, I'm gonna try to make you a presenter.
Okay, thank you, Mehmet. So we're gonna go ahead and go check out our project costs. So we had our supply plan. I'll just go and set the table again. We had our supply plan run. We had some commitments, and as those commitments are essentially received or transacted, those committed costs go down and they move into actual costs on the project costs. And then Mehmet did a number of transfers as well. So we're going to go ahead and see what actual costs we have coming in from supply chain. And we have quite a number now. So it's because he's completed the work order, and so everything that he's transacted now, there's an actual cost is actually on the project. So as we'll just kind of scroll over a little bit, and I know I'm running close to time, but again, I just want to scooch over here a little bit, and you'll see now we have our work order numbers from supply chain. We have our inventory items and the different inventory items that came through, and we have got visibility into the detailed inventory transaction number. We've got our shipment numbers that are coming around for the different transfers. And then we also, again, we have our purchase order information, purchase order line information. And then I want to kind of come over here a little bit more with, as he was doing his transfers, I'm seeing how they're coming inbound, from and to the different expenditure organizations. And then also we have the different resource transaction numbers that tracks down to that level as well. So again, I wanted to reiterate about the integration between projects and supply chain now. All the different types of transactions that occur in supply chain, we're collecting all their costs now. We have visibility and detailed visibility into them now at the expenditure item level. So now we can use all this different information as well to invoice it, to bill it based on the different revenue recognition models. So all this cost is in here. We can invoice it based on here if you're rate based or some other method that you may be using. But all this detailed information, we have visibility into the supply chain where we didn't have it before. And as a long-term project person who's done work with other manufacturing concerns, This is a piece that is very welcomed, and it just gives a lot of visibility to the project team who's managing information from multiple sources, and it's great to have it from the supply chain side now. So Mehmet, I'm going to go ahead and hand back over to you.
I'm going to turn it over to Courtney to see if there are any questions that we can address, because we have a couple minutes left. So
perfect. Thank you, Mehmet. I think we have time for maybe one question that came in. So let me grab one. Okay. Could you all provide some additional detail about the project type for the project that didn't get cost from supply chain management?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and field that one, Courtney. This is Wallace. So, yeah, even though we haven't shown that, however, there's what we do on the project side is we create a project type, and that project type is we essentially set it to not be capitalizable, not to be billable, and we don't enable any kind of burdening. And then what happens is we do build and provide a work breakdown structure for the project to be as detailed or the very minimum with one task. So that way, on the supply chain side, when they want to go ahead and essentially stripe by project or isolate and do everything that Mehmet was showing that he did before, they still have that capability. The big difference is that when they run their processes and they transact over there, the cost, that project type, because cost management people in the configuration said, any project that is a result of using this project type, do not send costs over to projects. So they maintain control of that, but they get the benefit of all the striping. We don't collect any costs on our side, so that cost so there'll never be any project costs or expenditure items for that project. But it's a simple project type that I prefer to set up specifically for the cost management team or the supply chain SCM team.
So we'll close the Q&A portion just since we're at the top of the hour now. I encourage you all to follow Perficient's team online. We add new posts weekly. You can do this by visiting proficient.com and clicking on the Insights tab for our blogs, white papers, and upcoming webinars. And as a reminder, there'll be an email sent to everybody with a link to today's event, as well as the slides, so you can review the session again, or you can share it out with others. I want to thank all of the speakers today and for you all for joining us on today's call. All right. Thank you, everybody.